They say the Dakota Badlands don't forgive. They say the sun out here ain't for warming your skin, it's for cracking the earth and boiling the blood in your veins. It's a hammer, see? An anvil. And it forges people into something hard. Or it breaks them. Abigail Kane was not broken. She was a woman carved from the same rock and grit as the land itself. Weathered, tough, alone. She'd made a life for herself miles from anywhere, with just a handful of cattle, a sturdy cabin, and a Winchester rifle that felt more like a part of her own arm than a tool. She liked the quiet, or maybe she just needed it. The silence out here was so loud it could drown out the ghosts of a past you'd run 1,000 miles to escape. But on one blistering afternoon in 1876, the silence was broken. Not by a sound, but by a sight. A dark stain circling in the endless blue sky. Vultures. And when you see vultures circling, you know something down below has given up its ghost. Abigail figured it was a stray calf. Maybe a deer that got clumsy. Annoying, but part of life. What she didn't know was that she was riding toward a moment that would change everything. Not just for her, but for an entire people she only knew as whispers on the wind. She was about to find a secret, buried in the dust, that would ignite a firestorm. And in the heart of that storm, she'd have to become something more than just a survivor. She'd have to become a voice for the silent. This is the story of how a lone woman, haunted by her own past, stumbled into a prophecy and a fight for justice that would shake the very foundations of the Wild West. The smell hit her first. That coppery, rotten, sweet stench of death left to bake under the Dakota sun. It was a familiar smell, but it never got easier. Abigail urged her bay mare, Jasper, over the rise, her hand resting near the stock of her Winchester. Death was a neighbor out here. You didn't like him, but you learned to live with him. Still, the sight of that many vultures, so bold and impatient, made a cold knot tighten in her gut. Her small ranch was a lonely speck in a vast rolling emptiness. The nearest town, Deadwood, was a hard ride away, a place she avoided unless she absolutely had to. The isolation was her shield. It kept the prying eyes and wagging tongues of so-called civilization at bay, but it also meant that when trouble came, it came for you and you alone. You were the law, the doctor, and the undertaker, all rolled into one. As she cleared the crest of the hill, her breath caught in her throat. This was no calf. This was no deer. Lying sprawled on the parched, cracked earth was a child. A little boy, no older than 6 or 7. His buckskin tunic was torn, his face turned to the sky, as if asking it for a mercy that never came. He was Lakota, the fine beadwork on his moccasins, the single hawk feather tied in his long dark hair. It was unmistakable. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over Abigail. This was bad. This was dangerous. Tensions between settlers and the Lakota were at a boiling point. Gold had been found in the Black Hills, their sacred Paha Sapa, and a flood of greedy men had poured in, tearing up the land and the fragile peace along with it. A dead Lakota child this close to her ranch? It was a spark next to a powder keg. She slid off Jasper, her movements smooth and practiced, pulling the Winchester from its scabbard. The vultures, seeing her, hopped closer to the boy, their ugly featherless heads bobbing. A low growl rumbled in Abigail's chest, a sound born from years of shouting at stubborn cattle into the wind. "Get!" she snarled, the sound raw and powerful. She fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle was like a whip across the plains. The big birds scattered, squawking their outrage as they launched clumsily into the sky. She approached the boy slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon. Where were his people? The Lakota were fiercely protective of their children. A lone boy like this? It didn't make any sense. He was unnervingly still. His chest didn't seem to be moving. His skin, the color of rich earth, was dry and flaking. He was dying of thirst if he wasn't already gone. Kneeling beside him, Abigail pressed her calloused, rough fingers against his neck, searching, hoping. For a long, heart-stopping second, there was nothing. Just still, hot skin. Her heart sank. She was too late. But then, a flutter. Faint, thready, as delicate as a moth's wing against her fingertips. He was alive, just barely. A strange feeling flickered inside her chest, an instinct she thought she'd buried years ago with the rest of her old life. It was a fierce, protective urge that came out of nowhere. With a grunt, she scooped the boy into her arms. He was terrifyingly light, a fragile bundle of bones held together by sun-scorched skin. His head lolled back, his face a mask of suffering. As she lifted him, a small, smooth gray stone fell from his clenched fist. It was worn and polished, clearly held and worried over for a long, long time. Without thinking, she slipped it into her pocket. The only thing that mattered now was the flicker of life in her arms. Getting him back to the ranch was a slow torture. She couldn't risk putting him on Jasper. The jarring ride would surely kill him. So she walked, one hand leading the horse, the other cradling the boy. The sun was a relentless enemy, beating down on her, sweat stinging her eyes. Every step was a battle. The same empty land she had chosen for its solitude now felt like a curse, an endless ocean of dust and heat. Her ranch wasn't much, just a sturdy log cabin, a small barn, and a corral. It was a fortress she'd built with her own two hands against the harshness of the world. She carried the boy inside, into the cool dimness that felt like a blessing. She laid him on her own cot and immediately set to work. She moved with an urgent, practiced efficiency, fetching clean water from the well. With a soft rag, she gently wiped the grime from his face, then began the painstaking process of moistening his lips, drop by drop, watching for any sign of a swallow. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. He was just limp. Despair began to creep in. But then she saw it, a tiny convulsion in his throat, an almost imperceptible movement. He was swallowing. He was taking the water. A sigh of relief escaped her lips, a sound as dry and cracked as the land itself. For hours, she was his lifeline. She brewed a weak broth from dried venison and used a spoon to get a few drops between his lips. She bathed his feverish head with cool water, her touch surprisingly gentle for a woman whose hands were calloused from axes and ropes. As she worked, she studied him. He had the high cheekbones and strong jaw of his people. A thick fringe of black eyelashes rested against his sun-darkened skin. He was a beautiful boy. A deep, aching sadness settled in her heart for the mother who must be out there somewhere, her heart torn out with grief. As dusk painted the cabin in long, dancing shadows, the boy's eyes fluttered open. They were dark as polished obsidian, and for a moment they were cloudy with confusion. Then they focused on Abigail, and a raw, primal terror exploded in their depths. He tried to scramble away, his weak limbs trembling, a terrified animal caught in a trap. "Easy now, child," Abigail said, her voice softer than she'd heard it in years. "You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you." The boy stared at her, his mouth opening as if to scream, but no sound came out. He pressed his lips together, his face a mask of pure frustration and fear. He tried again, his whole small body tensing with the effort. Still nothing, just silence. Abigail's heart felt like a lead weight in her chest. The boy couldn't speak. He was mute. Was he born this way, or had some horror stolen his voice? It didn't matter. His silence was a wall between them, higher and thicker than any language barrier. How could she possibly comfort him now? Then she remembered the stone. She pulled the smooth gray stone from her pocket and held it out to him on her open palm. "Is this yours?" she asked gently. The boy's eyes widened. With a sudden burst of energy, he snatched it from her hand, his small fingers closing around it, with a desperate, possessive strength. He clutched it to his chest as if it were his own heart, his dark eyes never leaving hers. The raw terror in them slowly began to fade, replaced by a flicker of cautious, wary curiosity. The days that followed were a strange, silent dance. Abigail went about her chores, mending fences, tending her small garden, milking the lone cow. But now she was constantly aware of the small shadow that followed her everywhere. The boy whom she'd started calling Tashunka in her head, a Lakota word for horse she'd once heard a trader use, refused to be left alone in the cabin. He would sit on the porch steps while she worked, his eyes tracking her every move with a quiet, unnerving intensity. His small hands were always clutching that gray stone. She tried to fill the silence. She talked to him constantly, telling him stories about her life, about the faraway city she'd run from, about the constellations that wheeled across the big night sky. She found herself confessing her own loneliness, speaking words aloud she had never dared to share with another soul. Tushunka would just listen, his head tilted, his expression impossible to read. He never made a sound. But sometimes when she spoke of her own lost family, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shared sorrow, an understanding that went deeper than words. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, the kind that makes the whole world tremble. A sudden, violent clap of thunder made the cabin shake. The boy let out a small, strangled gasp, the first sound she had ever heard him make. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with terror, and ran to her, burying his face in the coarse fabric of her skirt. Abigail froze. It had been so long since anyone had sought comfort from her, so long since she had offered it. Tentatively, slowly, she rested a hand on his head, her fingers sinking into his soft, black hair. "It's all right, Tushunka," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "It's just the sky talking." He didn't pull away. He clung to her as the storm raged, the rain lashing against the windows. In the flickering lantern light, she looked down at the top of his head, and a fierce, powerful love bloomed in her chest. It was as unexpected and as wild as the storm itself. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this couldn't last. His people would be looking for him, and when they found him here, with her, they wouldn't see a woman who had saved a child. They would see a white woman, an enemy, an intruder. The thought filled her with that old, familiar dread. But as she held the silent boy, she also knew something else. She would not give him up, not without a fight. He was a part of her now. The silence in her cabin was no longer empty. It was filled with him. And Abigail Kane, the woman who had sought isolation as a shield, suddenly found herself more connected, more vulnerable, and more terrifyingly alive than she had been in years. The calm was over. The storm had passed. But the real tempest was just about to begin. The arrival didn't come with war cries or thundering hooves, the way Abigail had always imagined it. It came with the sunrise, silent and spectral, as if the warriors had been born from the morning mist itself. She stepped out of her cabin, a bucket of milk in her hand, and simply froze. They were there, a line of riders on the ridge, their powerful forms silhouetted against the brilliant gold and rose of the dawn. They sat perfectly still on their horses, their faces grim, their dark eyes fixed on her. At their head was a man who seemed to be a part of the land itself, his presence as commanding as the ancient hills. He wore a magnificent war bonnet of eagle feathers, a testament to a life of leadership and bravery. His face was a mask of weathered authority. This was a chief. Abigail's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence. Her first instinct was to run, to bolt the door, to grab her Winchester. But then, a small, warm hand slipped into hers. She looked down. Tushunka was standing beside her. The boy who had been a silent, withdrawn shadow now stood tall, his small shoulders squared. His eyes were locked on the man in the war bonnet. A look of longing, of recognition, flickered across his face. The chief's eyes, as sharp and piercing as a hawk's, shifted from Abigail to the boy. A single muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign of the storm of emotion that had to be raging inside him. He dismounted, his movements deliberate and powerful, and began to walk toward them. The other warriors remained mounted, a silent, watchful wall. Abigail's grip on Tushunka's hand tightened. She stood her ground. She'd faced down blizzards, droughts, and starvation. She would not back down now. The chief stopped a few feet away. His gaze swept over her, taking in her worn dress, her calloused hands, her defiant posture. Then his eyes settled on Tushunka, and the hard mask of authority softened, revealing a profound, aching grief. He spoke. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The words were in his native Lakota, a language she couldn't understand, but the tone was universal. He was speaking to his son. Tushunka didn't answer. He just stared at his father, his face a confusing mix of relief, fear, and a deep unspoken sorrow. He clutched the gray stone in his other hand, his knuckles white. The chief's gaze snapped back to Abigail, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He spoke again, his tone sharp, demanding. He was accusing her. "I don't understand," Abigail said, her voice surprisingly steady. "He was alone. There were vultures. They were going to—" She trailed off, the words failing her. How could she describe the horror? One of the younger warriors dismounted and stepped forward. He spoke in broken, halting English. "You take boy." "I saved him," Abigail corrected, her voice firm. "He was half dead. He would have been gone if I hadn't found him." The chief listened, his face a stone carving. He looked at his son again, his gaze lingering on the boy's silent, upturned face. Then he looked back at Abigail, a long, searching look that seemed to see right through her, down to the marrow of her bones. He saw the defiance there, yes, but he also saw something else. He saw the fierce, genuine protectiveness she felt for the boy. He spoke again in Lakota, his voice softer now. The young warrior translated. He asks, "Why you help?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with a century of broken treaties and spilled blood. Why would a white woman, an intruder, help a Lakota child? Abigail looked down at Tashunka, at his small hand still holding hers so tightly. "He was a child," she said simply, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't hide. "He was alone. That's all that mattered." For a moment, the chief's stoic facade seemed to crack. He saw the truth in her words, the simple, unvarnished humanity of it. He had come expecting to find a monster, a kidnapper. Instead, he found a woman who had shown his son a kindness when his own people could not. The story, when it came out through the halting translations of the young warrior, was a gut-wrenching tragedy. The chief's name was Wanblee, meaning eagle. He had been away on a hunt. His wife, Tashunka's mother, had fallen ill with a fever that had swept through their camp. A white trader, a man named Silas Croft, had come to their village. He'd sold them medicine, a foul-smelling liquid he swore would cure the sickness. But the medicine had been poison. It had made her worse. In a fit of delirium, she had wandered away from the camp, taking her only son with her. By the time Wanblee returned, they were gone. They found his wife's body a day later, by a small, winding river the Lakota called the Ghost River. She had succumbed to the fever, her body ravaged by the so-called medicine, which was nothing more than a deadly mix of cheap alcohol and laudanum. Of Tashunka, there was no sign. They had searched for days, their hope shriveling with each rising sun. As the story was told, Abigail's blood ran cold. Silas Croft. She knew that name. He ran a disreputable trading post on the edge of the territory, a wretched place known for cheating the desperate. The thought that this greedy, cruel man was responsible for the death of Tashunka's mother filled her with a white-hot, righteous anger. Wanblee's gaze fell to the gray stone clutched in his son's hand. He spoke a single word in Lakota, his voice filled with awe. The young warrior translated, his own eyes wide. He says, "Wakan, sacred." The stone, Wanblee explained, was a Wakan Tanka, a sacred object passed down through his family for generations. It was said to hold the spirits of their ancestors, to offer protection to the one who carried it. Tashunka had never been without it. The fact that he'd held on to it through his entire ordeal, it was a sign, a powerful one. Then the great chief did something that stunned Abigail into silence. He reached out and gently touched his son's cheek, his calloused finger tracing the boy's face. A single tear cut a clean path through the dust on his own weathered cheek. He turned to Abigail, his hawk-like eyes locking with hers. He spoke, his voice low and solemn. The young warrior translated, his tone full of disbelief. He says, "You have saved the future of our people." Abigail stared, her mind reeling. What? What does he mean by that? Wanblee spoke again, his gaze unwavering. He says the boy, Tashunka, he is not just his son. He is the last of his line. His mother, she was the last of her family. The boy carries the blood of chiefs. He is the future of our Ghost River band. A wave of dizziness washed over Abigail. The weight of his words was staggering. She hadn't just saved a child. She had saved a legacy. "But why me?" she stammered. "I'm just a stranger." "You are more than a stranger," the warrior translated, his voice now filled with a newfound respect. "You are the one who heard his silent cry. The spirits, they led you to him." Then Wanblee made a declaration that would shatter Abigail's isolated world forever. He declared that she, Abigail Kane, the lone white woman, was now under the protection of the Ghost River Lakota. And then he said more. He said that until his son's voice returned, for he believed the trauma had only temporarily stolen it, she was to be his voice, his bridge to the world. He declared her Aoiwaka, the sacred voice. The pronouncement was met with stunned silence from the other warriors. An outsider, a white woman given such a title? It was unheard of, but the chief's word was law. Wanblee, a man of deep faith, saw the hand of the Great Spirit in this. He didn't see an enemy. He saw an instrument. Abigail was speechless. She had wanted nothing more than to be left alone, and now she was at the center of a drama more profound than she could have ever imagined. The solitary rancher was gone. In her place was something new, something terrifying and exhilarating. The Wild West had a way of rewriting your story, whether you wanted it to or not, and Abigail's was now tied, for better or worse, to the fate of a silent boy in the Ghost River Lakota. The weeks that followed were a tense and delicate dance. The Lakota didn't leave. They set up a small camp a respectful distance from her cabin, their hide teepees a stark, conical contrast to the sharp angles of her homestead. They were a constant, silent presence, a daily reminder of the bizarre new chapter of her life. Wanblee was a frequent visitor, his imposing figure often appearing at her door with the first light of dawn. He would come not to talk, but simply to watch his son, a silent, heartbreaking vigil. Tashunka, meanwhile, remained attached to Abigail's side like a second skin. He seemed to exist in a silent bubble, observing the strange new world around him. His hand would often find its way into hers, a small, warm anchor, a silent confirmation of the bond forged between them. The title of Aoiwaka felt like a lead weight on Abigail's shoulders. The sacred voice. It was a cruel irony. How could she be a voice for a boy who had none? How could she possibly bridge the canyon of culture and language that separated her from his people? She was a woman of action, of deeds, not words. She knew the language of an axe handle, of soil, of a rifle. The language of prophecy and diplomacy was completely foreign. Her attempts to communicate with Tashunka were a string of frustrating dead ends. She'd point to a cup, say cup, and he would just stare with those dark, unreadable eyes. She tried to teach him to write his name in the dirt, but he showed no interest in the strange, sharp symbols. He seemed locked away in his world of silence, a world that was both his prison and his sanctuary. The only thing that seemed to reach him was the gray stone, the Wakantanka. He would hold it for hours, his thumb tracing its smooth, cool surface. Sometimes his lips would move, as if he were whispering secrets to it. Abigail watched him, a sense of growing unease warring with her awe. What secrets did that stone hold? What unspoken truth was buried in the heart of this silent child? The breakthrough, when it came, wasn't from the stoic chief or the silent boy. It came from one of the Lakota women, an elder named Wiaka, which meant feather. Her face was a beautiful, wrinkled roadmap of a long and difficult life. She had watched Abigail with sharp, intelligent eyes, her initial suspicion slowly melting into a grudging respect. One afternoon, as Abigail was mending a fence, Wiaka approached her. The old woman spoke no English, but she carried a small, soft deerskin pouch. She opened it and emptied the contents into her wrinkled palm, a collection of small, flat stones, each painted with a different, intricate symbol. Wiaka pointed to a stone painted with the image of a hawk. Then she pointed to the sky, where a lone hawk was circling lazily overhead. She pointed to a stone with a wavy blue line. Then she pointed to the creek that ran through Abigail's land. A spark ignited in Abigail's mind. It was a language of symbols. She looked at Wiaka, a question in her eyes. The old woman nodded, a slow, knowing smile creasing her lips. For the next several days, Wiaka was her teacher. She patiently guided Abigail through the symbols for teepee, for horse, for fire, for sorrow. And she learned the symbol for Wakan, a circle with a dot in the center, representing the Great Spirit, the sacred mystery at the heart of their world. Armed with this new knowledge, Abigail went to Tashunka. She sat with him on the porch steps and spread the painted stones between them. She pointed to the stone for horse, then to her mare Jasper. A flicker of interest, the first she'd ever seen, lit up Tashunka's eyes. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out and picked up a stone. It showed the symbol of a woman with long hair. He held it for a moment, his small hand trembling. He looked at Abigail, and his eyes filled with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. Then he picked up another stone, the one for the river, and placed it next to the woman. He looked at Abigail, his meaning perfectly, horribly clear. His mother. The river. Abigail's heart ached. He'd been carrying this story inside him, a silent, crushing weight. The stones had given him a key to unlock it. Over the next few days, stone by stone, Tashunka told her everything. He told her about the sickness, his mother's delirium, their frantic flight. He told her about his mother collapsing by the water, his own desperate search for help, the circling vultures, and his slow, agonizing slide into unconsciousness. But there was another part to the story, a part he had kept locked away in the deepest, darkest part of his mind. He picked up a stone with the symbol of a man, a white man. Then, his hand trembling, he picked up another stone. This one was painted with the symbol of a coiled snake. He placed the snake stone next to the man stone, his small face twisted with a look of pure fear and hatred. Abigail's blood ran cold. The snake, the symbol of treachery, of deceit. Silas Croft. Tashunka then took the stone for his mother and placed it next to the snake man. Then, with a final, deliberate movement, he took the river stone and placed it on top of the mother stone. The meaning was chillingly, horrifyingly clear. The white man, Silas Croft, hadn't just sold them bad medicine. He had been there. He had been at the river. A new, more sinister version of events began to form in Abigail's mind. Had Croft, knowing the medicine was poison, followed them? Had he seen Tashunka's mother collapse? Then Tashunka did something that sent a shiver down her spine. He picked up one last stone, one with the symbol of a necklace. A beautiful, ornate necklace of turquoise and silver. He placed it right next to the snake man. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening force. Tashunka's mother was the wife of a great chief. She would have worn jewelry, symbols of her status. A valuable turquoise and silver necklace. The perfect prize for a greedy, ruthless man like Silas Croft. The unspeakable truth was finally revealed, not in words, but in the silent language of the stones. Silas Croft wasn't just guilty of selling poison. He was a murderer. He had found Tashunka's mother helpless and dying, and he had robbed her, leaving her to die. And he had seen the only witness to his crime, her small, terrified son. This was the true reason for Tashunka's silence. It wasn't just the trauma of his mother's death. It was the terror of what he had witnessed. He had looked into the face of pure evil, and it had stolen his voice. Armed with this terrible knowledge, Abigail knew what she had to do. She was the sacred voice. It was her duty to speak this truth, to demand justice for a woman who could no longer speak for herself. She went to Wanblee, the painted stones clutched in her hand. With Wiyaka there to help her translate the nuances, she laid out the story exactly as Tashunka had told it. As Wanblee watched the story unfold, stone by stone, his face grew darker than a thundercloud. The deep grief in his eyes was replaced by a burning, righteous fury. But to accuse a white man of murder, it was an explosive act. It could ignite the simmering tensions into an all-out war. Wanblee, for all his anger, was a man of wisdom. He knew he needed more than the silent story of a traumatized child. He looked at Abigail, his hawk-like eyes searching her face. He saw her conviction, her willingness to risk everything for his son. He made a decision. They would go to Deadwood. They would go to the white man's law, a concept that had so often failed his people. And he would take Abigail with him. She would be his voice in a world that refused to listen. The journey to Deadwood was a journey into the heart of enemy territory. But Abigail felt a strange sense of destiny settle over her. The world had found her in her isolation, and it had given her a purpose. She was no longer just a solitary rancher. She was Aoiwaka Wakan, and she was about to speak a truth that would make the whole territory tremble. The ride to Deadwood was like descending into a different world, a world that felt alien and seething with hostility. They traveled under the cover of a slivered moon, a small, grim procession moving through a land that seemed to hold its breath. Wanbli and his 5 most trusted warriors, their faces painted for a different kind of battle, were a silent, formidable presence. For the chief, every mile was a bitter pill, a step into a realm where the law had only ever meant betrayal for his people. Yet he rode on, his faith placed in the most unlikely of allies, the hard-faced white woman beside him. Abigail felt the crushing weight of that faith. She was no stranger to the raw, chaotic energy of boomtowns, but now, as an advocate for the Lakota, she saw it through new eyes. The flickering lights of the distant settlement weren't a promise of civilization. They were a beacon of the same greed that had left a woman dead and a child mute. She clutched Jasper's reins, her knuckles white. The title of sacred voice felt like both a crown and a cross. Deadwood was a cesspool. The main street was a river of mud and filth, the air thick with the noise of tinny pianos, drunken laughter, and the sharp crack of a distant gunshot. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. A Lakota chief in full regalia, flanked by warriors and a lone white woman, was a sight that stopped conversations cold. Faces peered from saloon doors, eyes filled with fear, hatred, and morbid curiosity. The whispers followed them like a foul wind. Savages, hostiles. Emery, the venom was a physical force. Abigail felt a cold fury rise in her. She lifted her chin, meeting the hostile stares with a gaze of pure, unadulterated defiance. They found the office of Marshal Seth Bullock, a small island of order in a sea of chaos. Bullock was a man whose formidable reputation was as much a part of his authority as the Colt peacemaker strapped to his hip. He looked up as they entered, his eyes taking in the scene with a practiced impassivity. He listened, his face unreadable, as Abigail laid out the story. She spoke clearly, her voice never wavering, presenting the facts as Tashunka had revealed them through the stones. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the office. Bullock leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning in protest. He stroked his thick mustache. "That's a hell of an accusation, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Silas Croft is a weasel, I'll grant you that. He'd sell his own mother for a plugged nickel. But murder? The boy is the only witness," Abigail stated. "A mute Indian boy," Bullock countered, not unkindly but pragmatically. "His testimony, even if he could give it, wouldn't be worth a spittoon full of sawdust in a Deadwood court. You know that." "His mother is dead," Wombly said, his accented English sharp and powerful. "My son saw the man with the snake's heart. He took her spirit stone." "Her what?" Bullock asked. "A necklace," Abigail clarified. "A valuable one. Turquoise and silver." Bullock's eyes narrowed slightly. Greed. That was a motive he understood. It was the lifeblood of this rotten town. "Still," he said, shaking his head, "it's not enough. I can't arrest a man on a child's story, Chief, no matter how much I might want to. I need something solid, something a jury can see and touch." He looked at Abigail. "I'll tell you what. I'll go ask around. I'll put the fear of God in Croft, but unless you can bring me something more, my hands are tied." That something more led them straight into the lion's den. Silas Croft's trading post. The place was a den of grime and desperation, smelling of stale tobacco and cheap whiskey. Croft himself, a portly man with shifty eyes and a perpetual sheen of sweat on his face, reacted with predictable, blustering outrage when Marshal Bullock started asking questions. "It's a lie, a slander," Croft sputtered. "I sold the squaw an herbal tonic. A kindness, that's what it was. This is what I get for trying to help these people." While Bullock kept Croft occupied with his loud denials, Abigail moved through the cluttered store. Her senses were on high alert. She wasn't just a rancher anymore. She was a hunter, and her prey was the truth. The shelves were piled high with overpriced junk. Shoddy blankets, rusty mining pans, bottles of rot-gut liquor. Her eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, searching for a glimmer of turquoise and silver. And then she saw her. In a far corner, pretending to admire a bolt of calico, stood a woman. Her flame-red hair was faded, her face painted in a desperate attempt to hide the tired lines around her eyes. And around her neck, resting against the cheap fabric of her dress, was a necklace that stole Abigail's breath away. It was a masterpiece of silver and turquoise, intricate and stunningly beautiful. It was a piece of art that was utterly, completely out of place in this grimy store, on this forlorn woman. It matched the symbol on the stone perfectly. Abigail approached, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. She didn't look at the necklace, not at first. She looked at the woman's face. "That's a lovely color on you," Abigail said, nodding toward the calico. The woman, whose name she would learn was Clementine, startled. "Think so?" "I do," Abigail said, her voice warm. "A woman should have beautiful things, like that necklace. It's truly stunning." Clementine's hand instinctively flew to her throat, her fingers caressing the stones. A genuine, proud smile broke through her painted facade. "Ain't it just? It was a gift, from a very generous gentleman." "He must think very highly of you," Abigail probed gently. "Mr. Croft," Clementine confided, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He can be a real charmer when he wants to be. Said he got it in a trade from some Indian woman. Said she was past needing it." The casual cruelty of those words, "past needing it," sent an ice-cold shiver down Abigail's spine. This was it. This was the proof. This was the solid thing the marshal needed. This was the piece that would hang Silas Croft. The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed, a tense, sweating mass of humanity divided down the middle. On one side, Croft's cronies and the town's prejudiced majority. On the other, a few sympathetic townsfolk, Marshal Bullock's deputies, and Wanbley and his warriors, who sat with a regal, unnerving stillness that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. When Abigail took the stand, a hush fell. With Wiaka beside her as an interpreter and a symbol of her bond, Abigail knelt on the floor. She didn't speak. She opened the deerskin pouch and let the painted stones spill onto the rough wooden planks. "This is a story," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It is not my story. It belongs to a boy who lost his voice. I am only its keeper." One by one, she picked up the stones. She showed them the symbol for mother, for sickness, for the snake man. Her narration was spellbinding. She made the jury see the frantic mother, the terrified child, the desolate riverbank. When she finally placed the turquoise necklace stone next to the symbol for Croft, and then covered the mother stone with the river stone, a collective gasp swept the courtroom. The defense attorney tried to paint her as a lonely, hysterical woman, manipulated by savages, but her quiet dignity was unshakable. The final, soul-shattering moment came from the silent witness himself. Tashunka had been brought into the courtroom, sitting quietly beside his father. As a sneering, sweating Silas Croft was led from the witness stand, he passed by the Lakota. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Tashunka's. And in that instant, something inside the boy snapped. He shot to his feet, his small body trembling with a rage too immense for his frame. His arm shot out, his finger pointing directly at Croft. His mouth opened and a sound tore from his throat, a primal roar of anguish and fury. Then came the word, a single explosive word that shattered the silence. "Wanatahai!" The Lakota word, meaning snake or ghostly deceiver, ripped through the air. He followed it with the English word that had haunted his nightmares. "Snake!" The impact was seismic. It was a voice from the grave. Women in the gallery wept. Hardened men on the jury stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Silas Croft visibly crumbled, his bluster dissolving into pathetic, whimpering fear. The guilty verdict was a formality. As they prepared to leave Deadwood, Juan Blee stood before Abigail, the rising sun casting a golden light around them. He held out a beautifully adorned deerskin dress. "The sacred voice must be clothed in honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did not just give my son back his voice. You gave our people back a piece of our own. You made them listen. The ride back to the ranch was different. The land no longer felt empty. It felt like home. The silence was no longer one of loneliness, but of peace. Abigail looked at Tashunka, riding beside his father, his face turned toward the future, his hand still clutching the sacred stone. The solitary rancher was gone. In her place stood Aoiweaki Wakan, a woman whose voice was now forever part of the Song of the Plains. The story of Abigail Kane and the boy Tashunka is a powerful testament to how a single act of compassion can change the world. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a bridge can be built and a voice for justice can be heard. If this story of courage and the fight for what's right resonated with you, please hit that thumbs up button to help share it with others. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another incredible story from the pages of history. Thank you for listening.